Hello and welcome to New Hope for Today. My name is Pastor Andrew Hise, and I'm the pastor of New Hope Friends Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina. Growing up in the church, I've heard a lot of the different parables and accounts in the scripture. Some of them are very easy to understand, others not so much. And maybe you've come across this as you read through the scriptures. You've come across some passages that you're just like, I have no clue what this is talking about. Well, as someone who is now a pastor and someone whose full-time job really is to study the scriptures, explain them in a way that are understandable, explain them in a way that people can relate to, I even still struggle understanding it myself. And so one of the things that we, as pastors, something that I have to do is make sure that I study deeply and understand a passage before I really start to explain it. Well, one passage that always kind of tripped me up, and I know that this is probably not going to be that way for anyone else, was a passage, a parable actually, that Jesus told in Matthew 25. It's known as the parable of the talents. And it starts in verse 14 and goes all the way down to 30. I'm not going to read the whole story, the whole parable for time's sake, but I just want to give you a kind of rundown, a synopsis of what this story was all about. It's this. Jesus tells the story of this guy who was a very wealthy guy, owned a lot of property, and so he was about to go on a trip, and he decided to give his servants, three of them specifically, different amounts of his property, different amounts of his money to look after while he was away. And so the one guy he gave 5 talents to, the other guy he gave 2 talents to, and the final guy he gave 1 talent to. While the guy was away, the guy with 5 talents and the guy with 2 talents both doubled what they were given by their business savvy, by doing some investments, that sort of thing. And the other guy, the guy that was given 1, essentially what he did is the equivalent of what we would do today is of putting something in the bank. He just took that money, buried it in the ground, and since they didn't have banks back then, he at least knew that he was going to come out with exactly what he was given. But the confusing part to me always came in when the master came back. Because I remember the very first time I ever heard this parable, it was in middle school. There was a guy who was teaching it to us, told the story, and then said, before he got, when he got to this point in the story, he said, who would you think did the right thing? And I immediately said, well, the guy who buried it. And of course, we all know how the story ends. That's not the right answer. I always thought those 2 other guys, the guy who had 5 and 2, they were taking a huge risk in trying to, put that money out there. Who knows? They could have lost all of that money. But at least that guy who got 1 talent, he knew he was going to come back with that investment. And so I always thought that. And the guy that was teaching at the time, he was like, no, that's not right, and tried to explain why, and at least showed me that Jesus agreed that it was the guys that had invested the money properly. But it was not until I got much older, and actually not until kind of recently, honestly, that I completely understood, other than just taking Jesus' word for it, why these 2 with the 5 and 2 talents were doing the right thing, and why the guy with 1 was not. And it comes down to 2 things, 2 details that we don't really know right off the bat. The first one is what a talent is. So a talent was 20 years' wage, which is a huge amount of money. It wasn't just some small amount. If we were to assume that the person, a low-level person at the time was making about $30,000 a year, we're talking about $600,000. And so the one dude was given $3 million, the other dude was given $1.2 million, and the other guy was given almost $500,000. This is a lot of money. It's not like some little amount. It's like a huge amount of money. And so that kind of brings things into perspective. It's not like money that couldn't be easily invested and at least put into a place where it's almost a no risk investment. I mean, even if you were to put $600,000 in the bank for a couple years, who knows how long this master was gone, you would at least get some interest on that. And you'd have no risk of losing below your principal of what you put in. And so right there, I see that this is a huge amount of money. But I think the thing that really does it for me is what the guy who buried the money said. What he said was his excuse for why he just dug a hole and buried the money. It's found here in verse 24. It says this: "He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have back what is yours." Now, this is a very telling thing. He says, I knew you to be a certain way. And what I think is very important right here is that this guy did not know his master. And that is what I think ties this whole thing together. Because then we know parables are heavenly story, are earthly stories with heavenly meanings. And Jesus goes on to explain, if you know who I am, who's given you, entrusted you with everything, your talents, your ability, the money, the breath, the very breath that you breathe. He's like, I've invested all of this in you. If you know me, then you'll know that I want you to use that for my glory. And so the point of this whole story is not just give back what God has given you. It's about investing and being a good steward of all that God has given you. And this guy, he was lazy because he didn't know his master. So my question for you today is, do you know the master? Do you know the one who has given you all things, your breath, the life that you have, the people that are in your life, the time that you have, the money that you have, all of it? God has given that to you. The ability to earn money was given to you. Do you know him? And are you being a good steward of what he has entrusted to you? We do this ultimately because Christ has died for us, entrusting in us his righteousness. So are we being a good steward even of his righteousness on this day? I love you all, and we'll see you very soon. New Hope for Today is a video devotional released on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which is recorded by Pastor Andrew Hise of New Hope Friends Church. New Hope Friends Church is located in Goldsboro, North Carolina at 4451 U.S. Highway 70 East. New Hope for Today. Strength for today, hope for tomorrow.